word nature, what comes to mind? Maybe mountains, maybe a forest trail, maybe the sound of birds singing or insects buzzing through a meadow. Somewhere to escape to from real life, a destination for a holiday or a weekend plan. And for many of us, that's the truth, is that nature is thought of as being somewhere else. But here's the thing, we are part of nature. Nature is in us, it's in our lungs, it's in our breakfast and our lunch, it's in the clothes that we're wearing. Nature isn't somewhere else, it is part of our real lives. And we can think of nature, it's so fundamental to humanity, we can think of it as humanity's operating system. And like any operating system, when small things start to fail, it's a warning, it's a signal, an indicator that something's wrong with the system. Small things like insects, like bees, they're indicators, they're tiny messengers telling us whether the system that we rely on is still functioning. Now, when I started working on bees about 30 years ago, people, mostly my family, said, "What on earth is the point of that?" I was hugely curious, I was really intrigued, I wanted to understand the behavior of bees visiting flowers, but the point was that they are hugely economically and societally significant. And one reason for that is that bees and other animals pollinate 75% of the world's leading food crops. So without bees visiting strawberry flowers and moving pollen within and between flowers, we don't get these big, luscious, red, ripe, juicy, vitamin-filled, antioxidant-filled, fiber-filled fruits. Without tiny flies visiting cocoa flowers on plants, on trees in the humid tropics of West Africa, we don't get chocolate. Without bees visiting coffee flowers in the shady mountain slopes of Colombia, coffee yields are reduced. So these tiny parts of our operating system are really important for food production, for producing tasty food, for producing healthy food, for improving the quality of our life. And they're also really economically important. So coffee and cocoa are both traded on global markets. They're worth billions in exports. They support the income of millions of smallholder farmers. And it's not just our food system that benefits from the actions of these tiny parts of our operating system, these pollinators. Cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, textiles, the cotton in the clothes that you're wearing, its production has benefited from the actions of insect pollinators. And in fact, 90%, nearly all of plant species on Earth, benefit from animal pollination, from the actions of bees and other animals. And people are starting to understand this. You might be familiar with this. And so now when I tell people that I work on bees, they often say something like, "Oh yes, that's very important, isn't it? But aren't bees in trouble?" So times have changed, attitudes have changed, but of course, nature has also changed. There aren't as many bees buzzing around meadows anymore. There aren't as many meadows. Here in Ireland, more than half of our native bee and half of our native plant species are officially recognized as being in decline. A third of our bee species are at risk of extinction. And this pattern is replicated the world over. Species are going extinct. They're going extinct at such a rate that scientists are now talking about us being in a mass extinction event. And to put that into context, the last mass extinction event saw the end of the dinosaurs, and they were around for much longer than us. And even the species that we're not driving extinct, we are causing their populations to shrink, so they're smaller and smaller, they're less resilient, they're less able to cope with change, with shocks, with changes in weather or disease. And we're driving these species into decline, and we're driving extinction through our activities, through clearing and polluting land and sea, by moving species around the globe, by exploiting them at a rate that's greater than that which they can regenerate at. And of course, by causing global climate change. And you might say, well, really, do we need all these species? What does it matter if we lose a few plants or we lose a few insects? It matters because when we lose species, we lose the functions that they deliver. Plants, we know that plants are the base of the food chain, right? We know that they're important for all other life. We know that they hold the soil together and prevent it from eroding. They affect water flows. They affect air quality. They affect climate regulation. And insects. A lot of people dismiss insects as pests, but insects are actually the most diverse group of animals on this planet, and only a tiny fraction of them are pests. And they carry out all sorts of important functions. For one, they're a really important food source for an awful lot of other animals. But they're also predators themselves. They feed on other animals, they feed on plants. And by doing that, they regulate populations. Many of them are important pollinators, as I've mentioned. And they're also really important for recycling. Without flies and beetles breaking down animal dung and waste material, we'd be overwhelmed with it. Nutrients wouldn't be recycled. New plants wouldn't be able to grow. So the loss of species isn't an abstract concept. The loss of species leads to the loss of planetary function. It leads to trouble in our operating systems. And when we lose our planetary functions, we also lose all the benefits that we get from nature. Benefits that I've mentioned in terms of raw materials, in terms of food, in terms of the raw materials that fuel our economy. But also benefits in terms of regulating our planet, benefits that make it a livable place for humanity, and benefits that are important culturally, spiritually, in terms of aesthetics, in terms of recreation, in terms of our own mental health and well-being. So the loss of nature, it's not just an environmental crisis. It's actually the biggest economic and market failure and human health risk in human history. It's also a risk to peace, to prosperity, to security. And the loss of nature is happening right now. Our natural systems, our operating system, the thing that underpins us, is at breaking point. So what can we do? The path forward starts with valuing nature, not putting a price tag on nature, but recognizing its worth and taking it into account in decision making. Stop thinking of it as a nice to have. Stop taking it for granted. Stop thinking of it as something we'll look after if we can afford it after we've done everything else. And the good news is that some companies, some public bodies, not enough, but some of them are starting to do this. They're starting to value nature in ecosystem accounts alongside their financial accounts. They're valuing things like flood protection, like climate regulation, like pollination. They're also starting to assess the risks. So looking at these risks associated with nature loss, assessing them and disclosing them alongside their climate risks. They're also starting to use a different language in the boardroom. So instead of talking about nature loss, talking about asset degradation, supply chain fragility, potential operational downtime. And they're starting to invest in nature, not just as philanthropy, but as the protective maintenance of a key asset, our key infrastructure. And whether you're a CEO of a company or a member of government or just a regular citizen on this planet, we can all do more. Often we can do more by doing less, consuming less as individuals, as corporations, as countries. By doing less in our own place of influence by mowing the lawns less, by using less toxic chemicals like pesticides. Because we do have an opportunity. We're at a critical time point in human history. Nature is quite resilient. If we give it the opportunity, it can come back, but now is the time. And something that we need to do more of is to talk about this. We need to talk more about nature. We need to talk more about how important and fundamental it is, how it underpins everything that we do. Because there are no healthy people or healthy economies without a healthy natural system, without this operating system that underpins us all. So we need to recognize, respect, and restore nature. Thank you.